The fog clung to the cobblestones of Whitechapel like a shroud, muffling the distant chime of Big Ben on that chill autumn evening in 1932. In the dim glow of a gas lamp, the door to Carver's butchery creaked open, revealing a scene of horror. Reginald Carver, the burly proprietor, lay sprawled across his bloodied workbench, his own gleaming butcher's blade embedded in his chest. A note clutched in his rigid hand read, "Forgive me." Was it suicide born of despair, or something more sinister? As the constable's whistle pierced the night, whispers spread. Who would inherit the thriving shop and its secrets? Chapter 1. The Arrival of the Little Belgian. The fog that night was not merely thick, it was alive. It curled like cigarette smoke around the iron lampposts of Whitechapel, swallowing sound and sight alike until only the wet slap of horse hooves and the occasional mournful hoot of a river barge reminded one that London still breathed beneath the shroud. It was the sort of fog that made honest men hurry home and dishonest men believe themselves invisible. At precisely 23 minutes past 9 on the evening of Tuesday, the 11th of October, 1932, a taxicab emerged from that gray sea as though conjured. Its headlamps carved two trembling tunnels through the murk before it shuddered to a halt outside a narrow shop front whose painted sign, Carver and Son, Family Butchers, Exeter to 1887, swung gently above a doorway flanked by black and white tiles now spattered with something darker than rain. A small, impeccably dressed man stepped down from the cab. Even in the poor light, his appearance was unmistakable. The egg-shaped head, the luxuriant upward curled mustaches waxed to dagger points, the gloss of the patent leather shoes that somehow remained unblemished by London mud. Hercule Poirot paid the driver with a crisp 10-shilling note, refused the change with a courteous flutter of gloved fingers, and turned toward the shop. Waiting for him on the pavement, collar turned up against the damp, was Chief Inspector James Japp of Scotland Yard. Japp's bowler was beaded with moisture. His bulldog face wore the expression of a man who has been dragged from a warm fireside and is trying not to show it. "Evening, Poirot," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to haul you out on a night like this, but I thought you'd want to see it before the Yard tramps every clue into Mentz." Poirot inclined his head. "You are too kind, mon ami. Though I confess when your telephone message spoke of a suicide that is perhaps not a suicide, the little gray cells, they became impatient." "Lead on." Japp pushed open the door. A constable standing guard snapped a salute that nearly took his helmet off. Inside, the air struck Poirot like a physical blow. The cold, sweet iron reek of fresh blood layered over the older, richer scents of smoked bacon, garlic sausage, and sawdust. Strings of sausages hung from the ceiling like garlands at a macabre festival. Marble slabs gleamed ghost-pale beneath the gas jets, and in the center of it all lay the body. Reginald Carver had been a big man in life. Broad-shouldered, thick-necked, arms corded with the strength of 30 years spent wielding cleaver and saw. Death had not diminished him. He lay on his back across the largest workbench, one arm outflung so that the knuckles brushed the floor, the other still clutching a scrap of paper. His white apron had soaked up so much blood that it clung to him like a second skin, stiff and shining. In the center of his chest, buried almost to the haft, protruded the butcher's blade he must have sharpened 1,000 times. 12 inches of Sheffield steel now returned to its master in the cruelest fashion. Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, absorbing every detail with those unnaturally bright green eyes. Then he moved forward with the neat, mincing steps that always made taller men feel clumsy. "Observe, Japp," he murmured, gesturing with one manicured finger. "The blade enters directly between the 4th and 5th ribs, angling slightly upward to pierce the heart. A thrust requiring considerable force, yet delivered with precision. One does not achieve such precision in the throes of despair. Jap grunted. Could have fallen on it. Poirot's eyebrows ascended like theater curtains. Fallen, you say? From what height, pray? The ceiling? He indicated the low beams above. And this note he clutches, forgive me. Written, one presumes, before he hurled himself upon his own knife. Non, it will not do. He bent closer, careful not to disturb the position of the body, and studied the dead man's face. Reginald Carver's eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. His lips were drawn back in what might have been a snarl or a grimace of agony. A thin line of foam, already drying, clung to one corner of his mouth. Interesting, Poirot whispered. The facial expression is not that of a man who has chosen death. It is the expression of a man who has been surprised by it. Jap shifted his weight. Doctor's on his way, but the local man had a quick look. Says heart failure, massive trauma, the usual. Time of death somewhere between 7 and 8 this evening. Poirot straightened and began his characteristic prowling. His gaze darted everywhere at once. The overturned stool near the chopping block. The cleaver lying several feet away as though flung in haste. The faint smudge of a boot print in blood near the rear door that led to the yard and smokehouse. The cash drawer standing open and empty. The wall calendar still showing Monday's date, though today was Tuesday. He paused at the doorway to the back premises. The lock showed fresh scratches around the keyhole, bright metal gleaming against the old brass. Someone forced this door, Poirot said softly. Or someone wanted us to think so, Jap countered. Carver could have scratched it. Himself any time. Poirot did not reply. Instead, he passed through into the narrow yard where the fog pressed even closer. A single bulb over the smokehouse door cast a sickly yellow glow. The ground here was flagged. Any footprints would have been plain, yet there were none. Only a few scattered wood chips and a faint, darker patch that might have been blood carried on a shoe. He returned to the shop and addressed the young constable who still hovered nervously. You were first on the scene, n'est-ce pas? Yes, sir. Got the call at 8:20. Shop was locked up tight from the outside, shutters down. Mrs. Carver, widow, she was the one who found him. Came to bring his supper like she does when he works late. Had her own key. Screamed fit to wake the dead, begging your pardon. And the rear door? Locked and bolted from the inside when we arrived, sir. Poirot's mustache quivered with satisfaction. Locked and bolted from the inside, yet showing signs of tampering from the outside. Most intriguing. Jap cleared his throat. Family and a couple of others are waiting in the parlor upstairs. Thought you might want a word before we start taking formal statements. Mais oui, one must always begin with those who love the victim, or profess to. They climbed the narrow staircase at the back of the shop. The living quarters above were surprisingly comfortable. Turkey carpets, a handsome walnut sideboard, photographs in silver frames showing the Carver family in happier days. 4 people rose as the detectives entered. Amelia Carver, the widow, was perhaps 45, but looked older tonight. Grief had drained the color from cheeks that had once been fashionably rouged. Her black dress was fastened to the throat with the new diamond brooch Poirot had noticed in the police photographs taken earlier. She sat very straight, hands folded in her lap, but her fingers worked ceaselessly at a lace handkerchief. Beside her, supporting her elbow, stood her son Jonathan, 26, tall like his father but slender, almost delicate. His fair hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He kept glancing toward the door as though expecting his father to walk through it at any moment and demand to know why everyone was making such a fuss. Across the room, apart from the family, sat Elias Thorne, Reginald's business partner of 15 years. Thorne was thin to the point of gauntness, with a livid scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Souvenir of a youthful brawl in Billingsgate Fish Market, rumor said. He smoked cigarette after cigarette, grinding out each butt with unnecessary violence. The fourth person was a young woman Poirot had not expected, handsome in a bold, Juno-esque way with auburn hair coiled beneath a modest hat. This, he learned, was Miss Victoria Hale, formerly employed as bookkeeper and cashier at the shop until her abrupt dismissal 3 weeks previously. Poirot greeted them with his most soothing manner, the little bow from the waist, the gentle clicking of heels. Mesdames, Messieurs, please accept the condolences of Hercule Poirot. It is a terrible thing that has happened. Terrible. But the truth, she is a stern mistress, and we must serve her. A few questions only, you understand. He began, as always, with the widow. Madame Carver, you discovered your husband's body? Amelia inclined her head. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady. Yes, I brought his supper, oxtail stew. He liked it on Tuesdays. The shop should have been closed, but the light was still burning. I let myself in with my key and there he was. Her composure cracked for the first time. She pressed the handkerchief to her lips. You heard no sound? No cry? Nothing, only the clock ticking. Poirot turned to Jonathan. And you, monsieur? Where were you this evening? The young man flushed. At the Cleaver's Edge. That's the public house on the corner. I often go there after work. Father and we had words yesterday about money. I thought it best to keep out of his way. Words about money, Poirot repeated softly. Always painful between father and son. You left the public house at what time? About 8:20, perhaps a little later. Came straight home. Mother was just going out with the stew. Poirot's gaze moved to Elias Thorne. Monsieur Thorne, you are partner with the deceased? Was, Thorne corrected harshly. He lit another cigarette with fingers that trembled slightly. 15 years we built this business. Blood and sweat, mostly his blood tonight. He gave a laugh that held no humor. Your movements this evening? Home, alone, reading the racing results. His scarred cheek twitched. Not much of an alibi, I'm afraid. Finally, Poirot addressed Victoria Hale. She met his gaze steadily, almost defiantly. You no longer work here, mademoiselle? I was dismissed, she said flatly. Mr. Carver decided my services were no longer required. After how long? 4 years. And the reason for this dismissal? Her chin lifted. He said I was light-fingered. I was not, but his word carried rather more weight than mine. There was a silence heavy with unspoken accusations. Outside, the fog seemed to press against the windows like a living thing. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and addressed them all. One thing is certain. Reginald Carver did not take his own life. Someone in this room, or someone who was able to enter and leave unseen, murdered him with considerable cunning. The locked room, the note, the blade in the heart, all arranged to suggest suicide. But Hercule Poirot is not deceived by appearances. I shall discover the truth. And when I do, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The murderer will discover that even the cleverest butcher can still be carved by a neater knife. As he turned to leave, his sharp ears caught the faintest sound, the creak of a floorboard in the attic above. His eyes flicked upward. Someone, or something, was still in the house, and the night had only just begun. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Smokehouse. The fog had thickened while Poirot questioned the family, turning the narrow yard behind Carver's butchery into a drowned world where shapes dissolved before they could be named. A single electric bulb burned above the smokehouse door, its weak halo trembling on wet flagstones. The air carried the mingled ghosts of hickory, saltpetre, applewood smoke, and something sharper. Fresh blood carried outward on a careless shoe. Poirot stepped into that courtyard with the delicacy of a cat entering an unfamiliar cellar. Inspector Japp followed, muttering about pneumonia and wasted time. Two constables stood guard at the alley gate, their capes black with moisture. "Regard, Japp," Poirot said softly, pointing with his cane. "The ground here is swept every evening. Monsieur Carver was a man of order. Yet see these wood shavings, they are fresh, and here—" He crouched, the hem of his overcoat brushing the stones. "A partial print, size 10, perhaps 11. Heavy tread. The heel is worn on the outside, a habit of men who lean to the left when they walk. Interesting." Japp produced a torch. The beam picked out a darker patch near the smokehouse wall, a palm-sized smear of blood already turning brown. "Carried out on a glove, perhaps," Poirot murmured, "or a sleeve." He moved to the smokehouse door. It was stout oak, iron-banded, fastened by a heavy hasp and padlock. The padlock hung open. "Curious," Poirot said. "The constable told us the rear door of the shop was bolted from the inside, yet this outer building is unlocked. One would expect the reverse." He lifted the hasp. The door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, exhaling a breath of warm, smoky darkness. Inside, rows of hams and sides of bacon hung like sleeping bats from the rafters. The floor was sawdusted. In the center stood the great iron smoking oven, still faintly warm. Poirot's torch swept the space. At once he stiffened. "Japp, venez vite!" Half hidden behind a stack of ash buckets lay a man's left-handed butcher's glove, thick leather, the sort used when boning heavy carcasses. The palm and fingers were stiff with dried blood. Beside it, almost missed in the shadows, a single brass button glinted. Military cut, bearing the crest of the Royal Artillery. Japp whistled. "That's not Carver's. He was too young for the war and right-handed besides." Poirot picked up the glove with a handkerchief. Observed the stitching. Handmade, expensive, and the blood, arterial, sprayed in a fine mist. The wearer struck the fatal blow, then discarded the glove in panic. But the button. Ah, that is a signature. They returned to the shop just as the police surgeon, Dr. Forsyth, arrived, shaking droplets from his umbrella. While he conducted his examination, Poirot slipped upstairs again. The family had dispersed. Amelia to her bedroom with Sal volatile, Jonathan to pace the parlor, Thorne and Victoria Hale to separate corners like hostile cats. Poirot found Jonathan staring out of the window into the fog, a cigarette burning unnoticed between his fingers. "Monsieur Jonathan," Poirot began gently, "your father, he served in the Great War?" Jonathan started. "No. Flat feet. He tried to enlist in 16, but they sent him home. Why?" Poirot produced the brass button in the palm of his hand. "Because someone who was in that war has been here tonight." Jonathan's face went the color of tallow. I was too young. Born 1906. Of course." Poirot's smile did not reach his eyes. "Yet someone in this house wears a coat with such buttons. Perhaps an old army greatcoat kept for cold weather?" Jonathan swallowed. "Uncle Elias, Mr. Thorne, he was a gunner. Lost half his hearing at Passchendaele. Still wears his old coat sometimes when he says it's warmer than anything new." Poirot bowed slightly and withdrew. He found Elias Thorne in the tiny office behind the shop, rifling through papers with barely concealed agitation. The scar on his cheek stood out livid under the green accountant's lamp. "Monsieur Thorne," Poirot said pleasantly, "a word." Thorne straightened too quickly. "I'm busy. The books will wait. Tell me, do you still possess your greatcoat from the war?" Thorne's eyes flicked to the coat rack by the door. Hanging there was a heavy khaki garment, threadbare at the cuffs, the brass buttons dulled by time, one button missing from the left sleeve. Thorne forced a laugh. "Sentimental rubbish. Can't bring myself to throw it away." Poirot stepped closer. Sentiment is a curious thing. It causes us to keep garments we no longer need, and to lose buttons in places where blood has been spilled. Thorne's hand went involuntarily to his scarred cheek. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Then perhaps you will explain why the left glove we found is sized for a man with hands such as yours, and why the inside of the cuff bears a monogram E.T. in faded red cotton. For a moment the only sound was the ticking of the butcher's clock and the slow drip of blood from the slab below. Then Thorne slumped into the chair. All right, he said hoarsely. I was here tonight. Around 7. Reginald and I argued. He'd discovered, borrowed money from the till. Gambling. He found out this morning, said he'd ruin me, call in the loan, end the partnership. I came back to beg him. He laughed in my face. I lost my head, grabbed the knife. He stopped, breathing raggedly. Poirot regarded him with clinical interest. Yet you did not, in fact, stab him. Thorne looked up, startled. What? The angle of the wound, the absence of defensive cuts on the victim's arms, the arterial spray pattern. All wrong for your confession. Also, you are right-handed, monsieur. The blow was struck by a left-handed person. You are merely rehearsing a story you hope will satisfy us. Thorne stared, mouth working soundlessly. Poirot leaned in until their faces were inches apart. What did you really see tonight, Monsieur Thorne? Because someone wishes us to believe it was you, and they have left your glove and your button as gifts. But Hercule Poirot does not accept gifts that are too convenient. From the shop below came a sudden shout, one of the constables. Poirot and Thorne hurried down to find Jap holding a crumpled sheet of paper just retrieved from the cold stove where it had failed to burn completely. Even charred, the words were legible. If you speak of the money, I will kill you tonight. The handwriting was a woman's, elegant, educated, furious. And at the bottom, a single initial, A. Upstairs, a door slammed. Running footsteps echoed on the stairs. Poirot's eyes glittered in the gaslight. The widow descends, he murmured, and the fog she begins to lift. Chapter 3. The Widow's Veil. Amelia Carver came down the narrow staircase as though each step were a small betrayal of her body. She had changed into full mourning, black silk that rustled like dry leaves, a heavy crepe veil pinned to her hair with jet pins, and the same diamond brooch at her throat that had caught Poirot's eye earlier. The stones flashed coldly each time the gas jet flared. In her gloved hands she carried a small Morocco leather writing case. Inspector Jap held up the half-burnt letter between finger and thumb, letting the blackened edges curl in the heat of the lamp. Care to explain this, Mrs. Carver? Amelia stopped 2 steps from the bottom. Even through the veil, Poirot could feel the force of her stare. That is not my handwriting, she said. The voice was steady, almost amused. Though the initial is mine, the rest is a forgery. Poirot took the fragment delicately, angling it to the light. The paper is expensive, decal-edged. The ink is Stevens blue-black, the same shade found in the fountain pen on your escritoire upstairs. And the threat, if you speak of the money, I will kill you tonight, is written with a broad nib that scratches slightly on the upstroke. Identical to the nib on your pen, madame. Amelia lifted her veil. Her face was pale but composed, the eyes red-rimmed yet unnaturally bright. Then someone has gone to considerable trouble, she said. Someone who has access to my stationery, my ink, my pen. Someone who wishes me ill. Or someone, Poirot replied softly, who wishes to appear to wish you ill. He gestured toward the small parlor that opened off the shop. Shall we sit? The air here is fatiguing. They arranged themselves like figures in a somber tableau, Amelia on the horsehair sofa, back straight as a ruler, Jap in the armchair with his notebook, Thorne lurking by the door, smoking furiously. Jonathan hovering behind his mother's shoulder as though ready to catch her if she swooned. Victoria Hale had been sent home under escort, but her absence felt like a presence all the same. Poirot did not sit. He prowled. "Madame, let us speak plainly. Your husband was a wealthy man, yet the business accounts show irregularities. Large sums withdrawn over the past year, always in cash, always signed by you. Pocket money, perhaps." Amelia's lips thinned. "Reginald was generous. He liked me to have whatever I desired. Even when the shop's profits were falling? Even when Mr. Thorne was borrowing from the till to cover his gambling debts?" Thorne made a strangled sound like an angry dog. Jonathan flushed crimson. Amelia turned her head slowly toward Thorne. "I knew nothing of Mr. Thorne's difficulties," she said. "If Reginald chose to keep his partner's shame from me, that was his affair." Poirot stopped in front of the mantelpiece. On it stood a photograph in a silver frame. Reginald and Amelia on their wedding day, 28 years earlier. Reginald already burly, already proud. Amelia slender and laughing, eyes full of uncomplicated joy. Beside it, a more recent portrait, Amelia alone, wearing the diamond brooch. "Tell me about the brooch, madame." She touched it unconsciously. "A gift, for our silver anniversary last spring. Yet the jeweler's mark inside the clasp is dated only 6 weeks ago. Curious anniversary timing, none?" For the first time, her composure cracked. "Reginald replaced the stones. The original diamonds were flawed. He wanted me better ones." Poirot nodded as though this were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course. And the money for these new stones, drawn from the withdrawals you signed for?" A silence thick enough to cut with the butcher's blade upstairs. Jonathan burst out, "Mother, you don't have to answer this. It's ghoulish." "Silence, mon jeune ami," Poirot said without raising his voice, and astonishingly, Jonathan obeyed. Amelia drew a long breath. "Very well. The truth is simpler than you imagine, Monsieur Poirot. My husband had begun to drink more heavily this past year. He became suspicious. He accused me of having a lover. There was no lover, but there were debts. Dressmakers, mostly. I was ashamed to tell him, so I took small sums, intending to repay them when my quarterly allowance arrived. The brooch was meant to be my confession and my apology in one. He forgave me the moment he clasped it round my neck." Her voice trembled on the last words, but the tears that welled did not fall. Poirot studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to the writing bureau in the corner, opened it, and lifted out a leather-bound diary secured by a tiny brass lock. The lock had been forced, the hasp hung loose. "Yet someone believed there was more to hide," he said. "Someone searched this desk tonight while we were in the smokehouse. They took nothing, because what they sought was not papers but confirmation." He opened the diary to a page marked with a black ribbon. The entry, dated 3 days ago, was in Amelia's neat slanting hand. "He struck me again tonight. The mirror is cracked, so I think is my heart. If he touches me once more, I swear I will kill him or leave him. God forgive me." Poirot closed the book gently. Amelia had gone very white. "That is private," she whispered. "Murder, madame, makes all things public." Jonathan stepped forward, fists clenched. "If my father laid hands on her—" "He did," Amelia said quietly, "many times. But never where the world could see. I stayed because I had nowhere to go and because I still loved the man he used to be. Tonight I brought his supper as always. I found him already." Her voice broke completely. Poirot replaced the diary. "Yet the supper basket is not in the shop. Where is it, madame?" I dropped it when I screamed. The constable must have taken it." Japp shook his head. "No basket was logged, ma'am." For the first time, real fear flickered across Amelia's face. From the hallway came the measured tread of boots. The young constable appeared, helmet under his arm, eyes wide. "Begging your pardon, sir. We found something in the dustbin out back, wrapped in newspaper like it was meant to be burned with the rest." He held out a small wicker basket lined with a blue-checked cloth. Inside lay a stone-cold oxtail stew untouched, and beneath it, half concealed by the gravy-soaked napkin, a dainty pearl-handled revolver, fully loaded, the initials AC engraved on the butt. Amelia stared at it as though it were a serpent. "That is not mine," she said faintly. "I have never owned a pistol in my life." Poirot lifted the weapon with his handkerchief. The barrel was clean, but the scent of fresh oil clung to it. "Then we must ask ourselves," he said softly, "who wished the police to believe that the widow came armed tonight, prepared either to kill her husband or to defend herself, and who removed the basket from the scene to plant this pretty toy?" He turned the revolver so that the light caught the engraving. "And why, having gone to such trouble, they then grew careless and left it where even an English constable might stumble across it." Somewhere in the house above them a window banged open in the wind. The fog rushed in like an uninvited guest, and with it came the faintest sound, a woman's sob quickly stifled. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The house. She has not yet finished speaking," he murmured. "Let us listen very carefully to what she says next." Chapter 4. Ale and Alibis. The Cleaver's Edge stood on the corner of Thrall Street and Gunthorpe, a low brick tavern whose windows glowed amber through the fog like the eyes of some watchful beast. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke, spilled beer, and the sour warmth of unwashed working men. A fiddler sawed away in the corner. The tune was "The Man Who Broke the Bank at Monte Carlo," played with more enthusiasm than skill. Poirot entered at 10 minutes past 11, Jap at his elbow. Conversation faltered for a moment. The little foreigner in the fur-collared overcoat and gleaming shoes was as out of place as a diamond in a butcher's tray, then resumed louder than before, as though to prove nothing could disturb honest English drinkers. The landlord, a vast red-faced man named Bert Hoskins, wiped his hands on a towel and leaned across the bar. "Evening, gentlemen. You'll be the police, I expect. Terrible business about Mr. Carver. Best leg of lamb in Whitechapel he had. What can I get you?" "Information," Poirot said pleasantly, "and perhaps a small glass of your best cognac, if such a thing exists in this establishment." Hoskins produced a bottle with the reverence. While he poured, Poirot surveyed the room. Half the faces he already knew from the police photographs of regular customers. The other half looked capable of anything. "Jonathan Carver was here earlier this evening," Jap said. "We need to know exactly when he arrived, when he left, and how he seemed." Hoskins nodded toward a table near the dartboard. "Young Jono? Right as rain till about 8 o'clock. Sat with his usual crowd. Tommy Pike, Sid the barber, couple of lads from the brewery. Bought a round at 7:30, then another at 8 sharp. After that he got quiet-like, stared into his pint as if it owed him money. Left sudden round 20 past 8, maybe 8:45. Didn't say good night nor nothing. Was he drunk? 3 pints in 2 hours? Not Jono. He can sink 6 and still walk a chalk line." Poirot sipped the cognac, surprisingly decent, and drifted toward the table Hoskins had indicated. The men there greeted him with wary civility. Tommy Pike, a burly drayman with hands like hams, spoke first. "He were proper cut up, Mr. Poirot. Kept saying his dad was going to cut him off without a shilling. Said the old man found out about the gambling debts. Jono owes Sharky Levin near 200 quid, see? Sharky's boy's been round twice this week. Yet he left early?" Poirot mused. "Aye, got a note." Pike jerked a thumb toward the saloon bar hatch. "Little errand boy brought it in. Jono read it, went white as a gutted cod, threw half a crown on the table and bolted. May one see this note? Pike shrugged. Burnt it in the ashtray, didn't he? But I saw the writing. Big angry scrawl like a woman's. Poirot's mustache twitched. Another note. He moved to the hatch. Behind it, a sharp-faced girl of about 19 was pulling pints. She met Poirot's gaze with bold curiosity. You delivered a message to Mr. Jonathan tonight? Might have. She wiped foam from her upper lip. Bloke at the end of the bar give me a shilling to take it over. Didn't see his face proper. Hat pulled low, collar up. But he had a scar here. She drew a finger from ear to mouth. Elias Thorne's signature. Poirot returned to the bar in time to see Jap closing his notebook with a snap. Landlord confirms Thorne was in here from 6 till 7:30. Left saying he had to meet someone. Came back at 20 to 10, ordered a double whiskey, and sat in the snug looking like death warmed up. Stayed till we arrived to fetch him. So Thorne has no alibi for the crucial hour, Poirot murmured. And he arranged for Jonathan to receive a message that sent him hurrying away before the murder. He was about to speak again when the street door banged open, admitting a gust of damp air and Victoria Hale. She had discarded her modest hat. Her auburn hair was wind-tossed, her cheeks flushed. She wore a dark green coat with a fur collar, expensive, Poirot noted, far beyond a dismissed bookkeeper's wages. Miss Hale? Poirot greeted her with a small bow. You honor us. I couldn't sleep, she said breathlessly. I had to know what was happening. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the group of regulars. May I speak with you privately? Jap led her to the tiny parlor behind the bar, normally reserved for darts matches and funerals. Poirot followed, closing the door against the tavern noise. Victoria wasted no time. It's about the revolver you found. It isn't Mrs. Carver's. It's mine. Jap's eyebrows shot up. Poirot merely waited. I bought it last year, she continued, words tumbling over one another. After a man followed me home from the shop one night. Reginald, Mr. Carver, laughed at me, said I was hysterical. So I kept it hidden in my handbag. 3 weeks ago, the day he sacked me, I left in a hurry, I think. I'm almost sure. I left the handbag in the office drawer. And the initials? Jap asked. Amelia Carver. It was a gift from her husband on their 20th anniversary. She hated the thing, said only Americans carried guns. So she gave it to me. Said I might need it more than she did. Poirot leaned forward. When exactly were you dismissed, mademoiselle? Tuesday, 3 weeks ago at 6 o'clock. Mr. Carver was in a rage. Said he'd found discrepancies in the books that I'd been stealing. I swore I hadn't, but he wouldn't listen. He locked the office door, opened my bag, took out my purse and the revolver, threw 20 pounds at me and told me never to come back. 20 pounds, Poirot echoed. The exact amount missing from the safe tonight. Victoria's eyes widened. I didn't take it. Someone must have... Someone, Poirot finished gently, who wished the police to find a gun with Madame Carver's initials in a basket of her own stew, beside a threatening note in her handwriting. Someone who knew about the revolver and where it was kept. From the bar came the crash of breaking glass and a sudden roar of voices. Jap flung the door open. Elias Thorne stood in the middle of the floor, face purple, brandishing a broken bottle at Jonathan Carver. Jonathan, white and shaking, had backed against the counter. You little bastard, Thorne shouted. You killed him for the money and now you're trying to hang it on me. Jonathan's hand went to his coat pocket. For one frozen second, Poirot thought he would draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled telegram and flung it at Thorne's feet. Read it, you drunken sot. Father was cutting me off tomorrow. He sent this to my lodgings this morning. If anyone had reason, it was you. Thorne stared at the yellow paper as though it might bite him. Poirot stooped and retrieved it. Meeting lawyer tomorrow. Stop. You are no longer my son. Stop. Do not come to shop again. It was signed R. Carver in the same heavy black scrawl Poirot already recognized. The tavern had gone very quiet. Poirot looked slowly from face to face, Victoria trembling, Jonathan shaking with rage or fear, Thorne suddenly old and gray. 3 people, he said softly, each with motive enough to kill, each with a piece of the puzzle, and each, it seems, with an alibi that crumbles like pie crust the moment it is touched. He tucked the telegram into his pocket. Come, Jap, the fog is lifting a little. Soon we shall see clearly who held the knife and who merely provided the whetstone. Outside, a church clock struck midnight. The sound rolled across the rooftops like a warning. Chapter 5. The Hidden Ledger. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the shop had become a place of ghosts and gaslight. The body of Reginald Carver had been removed to the mortuary van. Only a dark, irregular stain on the workbench remained, already dulling to rust brown. The constables stood about in awkward silence, breathing steam into the cold. Upstairs, Amelia Carver had been persuaded to take laudanum and sleep. Jonathan had gone to his club ostensibly to fetch clean clothes. Thorne and Victoria Hale had both been sent home with stern instructions to remain within call. Poirot, however, had not left. He sat alone in the little office behind the cutting room, the green-shaded accountant's lamp burning low. A large red ledger opened before him like a dissected carcass. Every few minutes he made a neat entry in his own tiny notebook, murmuring in French beneath his breath. Inspector Japp, returning from the street with 2 paper cups of atrocious police canteen coffee, found him thus. Thought you'd be tucked up in your flat by now, Poirot. It's been a long day. The day is not yet finished, mon vieux. Regardez. He turned the ledger so Japp could see. Columns of figures marched down the pages in Reginald Carver's heavy, impatient hand. But over the past 14 months, a second lighter script had appeared, elegant, continental, unmistakably feminine. Victoria Hale's handwriting, Japp said at once. Précisément. And observe the pattern. Each month on the 15th, a round sum, never less than £50, never more than 80, is withdrawn for sundries. The entry is initialed R.C., yet the figures themselves are in Mademoiselle Hale's hand. Carver trusted her completely. Japp whistled. That's over 800 quid gone missing. £847, 6 shillings to be exact. Yet when Carver dismissed her, he accused her of theft. Curious, non? Poirot turned more pages. Suddenly he stopped. A stub of paper had been glued over an original entry. With delicate care, he lifted the corner with a penknife and tweezers. Beneath, in Carver's writing, was a single line. Paid VH final settlement $500. Silence money. The date was the day Victoria was sacked. Blackmail, Japp said flatly. Or hush money, Poirot corrected. The question is, silence about what? He closed the ledger and stood. Come. There is one more place we must look before the night ends. They descended to the cellar beneath the shop. Stone steps, damp walls, the smell of brine and old ice. In one corner stood the great walk-in refrigerator. In another, a heavy iron safes and a battered roll-top desk that had clearly belonged to Carver's father. Poirot attacked the desk with the enthusiasm of a terrier. Within minutes he had found it. A second secret ledger bound in green baize, its pages filled with Carver's private scrawl. Here were recorded not the shop's takings, but his personal investments, racing bets, loans to acquaintances, and most damning of all, regular payments to an address in Bloomsbury. Japp read over Poirot's shoulder. Mrs. E. Langley, 14 Guilford Street, 20 monthly. Who the devil is Mrs. Langley? A lady, I suspect, whom Amelia Carver has never met. Poirot's voice was grim. For the past 7 years, Reginald Carver has kept a mistress and a second household. The payments increased sharply last year. Doubtless the lady became more expensive when she discovered the existence of the legitimate wife. The money came from the shop, signed out as sundries by the trusting Miss Hale. Jap gave a low whistle. So Victoria knew everything. She knew, and she threatened to tell Madame Carver unless she was paid to remain silent. Carver, cornered, paid the £500 on condition she vanished. But he could not resist the final cruelty, accusing her of theft as she left. Poirot closed the green ledger. Now the pieces begin to arrange themselves. Amelia, discovering the withdrawals, believes her husband is being robbed. Victoria, dismissed and ruined, nurses a burning grievance. Jonathan facing disinheritance. Thorne drowning in gambling debts. 4 people, each with a knife at their throat. He climbed the stairs again, Jap behind him. In the cutting room, he paused beside the great marble slab where Carver had died. A single drop of blood still clung to the edge, trembling whenever someone walked past. Poirot addressed the empty air. But only one of them actually struck the blow. And that person made one mistake, one tiny mistake that Hercule Poirot has noticed. Jap waited. The butcher's blade, Poirot said softly, was wiped almost clean. Almost, but not quite. On the underside of the handle, where the murderer's thumb pressed when he withdrew the knife, there remains a perfect print. Not in blood, you understand, but in something far more revealing. He produced a small magnifying lens and a pocket torch. Together they bent over the weapon now lying on brown paper under police evidence sheet. "There!" Poirot's voice vibrated with triumph. "A thumbprint in axle grease, black, oily, the kind of grease used on the smokehouse trolley wheels. And the ridges, see how they swirl to the left? The mark of a left-handed person." Jap stared. "Jonathan Carver is left-handed. We saw him sign the statement earlier." "Oui, but so, my friend, is another member of this charming circle." He straightened, eyes glittering in the gaslight. "Come, we will pay a dawn call that will not be refused." They stepped out into the alley. The fog had thinned to a pearl-gray mist. The first pale suggestion of morning showed above the rooftops. As they turned into the narrow alley that led to the street, a figure detached itself from the shadows opposite the shop, a woman in a dark cloak, face hidden by a scarf. For a heartbeat she seemed about to approach, then thought better of it and melted back into the gloom. Poirot watched her go. "She is afraid," he murmured. "Good. Fear is the beginning of truth." At the mouth of the alley, a newsboy was already crying the early editions. "Butcher murdered in locked shop, suicide note a fake." Poirot bought a paper, scanned the headlines, and smiled a small cat-like smile. "Excellent," he said. "Now the murderer will feel the walls closing in. And when walls close, even the cleverest rat makes a noise." He tucked the newspaper under his arm. "Tomorrow," he told Jap, "we will set the trap. And the little gray cells, they will provide the cheese." Behind them, the shop sign creaked in the morning wind. Carver and Son. The painted cleaver seemed to drip fresh blood in the rising light. Somewhere in Whitechapel, a clock struck 4. The night was over. The hunt had only just begun. Chapter 6. Midnight Confessions. The Carver parlor at 1:30 in the morning was lit only by a single gas mantle turned low and the red eye of the coal fire. The 5 principals had been summoned back to the house with curt telephone messages. "Come at once. Do not delay." They arrived separately, dripping mist from coats and hats, and were shown into the room like reluctant guests at a wake. Amelia Carver entered first, still in full mourning, the diamond brooch now hidden beneath a black shawl. She looked as though the laudanum had worn off too soon. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish. Jonathan followed, unshaven, smelling faintly of brandy. His left hand kept clenching and unclenching. Elias Thorne came next, the scar on his cheek livid in the firelight. He had changed into an old regimental sweater that made him look even thinner. Victoria Hale was last. She had not bothered to repin her auburn hair. It fell in heavy waves over the collar of a man's camel hair coat several sizes too large for her. Poirot noted the coat with interest. Inspector Japp stood by the door, arms folded. 2 constables waited in the hall and kitchen. No one would leave this room until Poirot allowed it. Poirot himself occupied the center, small, immaculate, terrible. He carried no notebook tonight. The little gray cells, he had said, required no prompt. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, voice soft yet carrying to every corner. "We have reached the moment of truth. The lies have been many, the truths few and reluctant. But the truth, she is a lady who will not be denied." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "First, let us dispense with the impossible. Reginald Carver did not kill himself? No. The angle of the wound, the absence of hesitation marks, the note written in a hand not his own, all forbid it. Second, was this a robbery? No. The cash drawer taken contained only 12 pounds, yet the safe with over 300 was untouched. Third, did an intruder enter from outside? No. Both street door and rear door were locked and bolted from within. The smokehouse padlock was opened with a key from the bunch on Carver's own belt. Therefore, the murderer is in this room. A collective intake of breath quickly stifled. Poirot raised one finger. But which one? Let us examine the alibis once more now that fear has loosened tongues. He turned to Thorne. Monsieur Thorne, you claimed to be home alone. Yet the barmaid at the Cleaver's Edge saw you pass a note to the errand boy. A note that sent Jonathan rushing away at 8:20. You then left the pub yourself at 8:30 and did not return until nearly 10. Where were you? Thorne licked dry lips. Walking, thinking. Alone in the fog. How convenient. To Jonathan. You, monsieur, received that note and hurried. Where? Jonathan's voice cracked. To father's bank. The note said he was closing my account at 9 sharp. I went to plead with the night porter. He'll remember he turned me away. Poirot nodded. He will indeed. You arrived at 8:50 and left at 9:15. Too late to return here and commit murder. Jonathan sagged with relief. Poirot's gaze moved on. Miss Hale, you told us you were at the Adelphi Theater. The torn ticket stub in your handbag confirms it, yet the performance began at 8:30. You could have been here at 8, committed the deed, and still reached your seat before the curtain. Victoria lifted her chin. I was in my seat at 8:25. The usher remembers me. I asked for a program. Indeed, and yet... Poirot produced the camel hair coat she still wore. This belongs to Monsieur Thorne, no? I observed it earlier on the hook in his lodging. You collected it tonight. Why? Victoria flushed scarlet. He lent it to me. The night was cold. Or because your own coat, green fur-collared, was soaked in blood and had to be disposed of? She gasped. Thorne swore under his breath. Finally, Poirot faced Amelia. Madame, you brought supper at approximately 8:15. You say you found your husband already dead. Yet the stew was stone cold when the basket was recovered. It takes longer than 10 minutes for oxtail stew to cool so completely on a warm evening. Therefore, the basket was prepared much earlier, perhaps as early as 7:30, and kept waiting. Amelia's hands twisted in her lap. Poirot's voice softened, almost tender. Madame, you wrote in your diary that if your husband struck you once more, you would kill him. Tonight he struck you, did he not? She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. And you brought not only stew, but the pearl-handled revolver you had given Miss Hale for protection. You intended perhaps only to threaten, but he laughed at you, turned his back, And you shot him? No! The word burst from her like a sob. I brought no gun. I found him already with the knife in his chest. I dropped the basket and ran upstairs to telephone the police, but the line was dead, cut, I thought. When I came down again, the basket was gone. Someone had moved it. Poirot studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Very well. We eliminate the impossible once more. Madame Carver did not shoot her husband. The medical examiner found no bullet wound, only the knife. Nor did she stab him. The thumbprint in axle grease is not hers. He turned suddenly to the fireplace. The coals had burned low. A single tongue of flame licked up as though encouraged by his attention. Observe, he said conversationally. The murderer wiped the knife handle almost clean, yet missed the underside. A left-handed person's thumbprint. Jonathan is left-handed, yet has an alibi. Who else in this house is left-handed? Every eye turned to Victoria Hale. She had gone very white. Slowly she raised her left hand, the one that had remained hidden in the folds of Thorne's coat, and stared at it as though it belonged to a stranger. Poirot spoke gently. You were here at 8 o'clock, mademoiselle. You came to collect the final installment of your silence money. Carver refused. Perhaps he mocked you, called you a thief again. You seized the big knife from the block. You knew exactly where it hung, having worked here 4 years. One thrust, perfectly placed, then panic. You wiped the blade, planted the revolver and the forged note to implicate Madame Carver, hid the basket in the dustbin, and fled through the smokehouse, discarding your bloodied coat in the river on your way to the theater. You even remembered to buy a program to establish your presence. Victoria's breath came in shallow gasps. You can't prove— But I can, Poirot interrupted. Your coat was not discarded. It is at this moment drying in the boiler room of the Turkish baths in Brick Lane, where you left it with the attendant saying you would collect it tomorrow. The attendant, a honest Turk, has already identified it. And in the left pocket, ah yes, is a railway ticket from Liverpool Street to Harwich, purchased this afternoon. You intended to leave England at dawn. Victoria looked wildly around the room. Thorne would not meet her eyes. Jonathan stared as though seeing her for the first time. Amelia simply closed her eyes. Victoria's shoulders sagged. He laughed at me, she whispered. Said I was nothing but a clerk who'd got above herself. Said he'd see me in the gutter first. I only meant to frighten him. But the knife was in my hand and— She began to cry, harsh, tearing sobs. Japp stepped forward with the handcuffs. Poirot turned away. In the grate, the last coal collapsed into ash. Outside, a milk cart rattled over the cobbles. The first pale light of Thursday morning crept through the curtains. The case, it seemed, was closed, yet Poirot's brow remained furrowed. Something, some tiny discord, still troubled the perfect symmetry of his little gray cells. He looked once more at the 5 faces around him, and the doubt deepened. Non, he said quietly, almost to himself. It is too neat, too perfect. Victoria Hale is guilty of many things, but not, I think, of this murder. The room froze. Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. We begin again, he said. Chapter 7. The Delivery Boy's Tale. The clock in the parlor had just chimed 2:45 when the knocker sounded. 3 timid taps, as though the caller feared waking the dead. Japp opened the door to find a small, half-frozen boy on the step, peaked cap askew, nose running, clutching a wooden tray that had once held pork pies. Tommy Rourke, age 12, delivery lad for Higgs & Son Bakers, 3 streets away. Come in, lad, Japp said gruffly. You're shaking like a jelly. Tommy stepped inside, eyes round as chapel plates at the sight of handcuffs still dangling from Victoria Hale's wrists. Poirot motioned the constable to remove them for the moment. The drama required a new witness. "Speak, mon petit," Poirot encouraged, offering a peppermint from his silver box. "You saw something tonight?" Tommy nodded so hard his cap fell off. "Near 8 o'clock, sir. Mr. Carver always has 24 mutton pies on Tuesday for the pubs. Brung 'em round the back way like always. The yard door was open a crack. I heard voices, angry ones. A woman was crying and a man shouting something about ruined and never darken my door again. Then a sort of grunt like someone had been punched in the belly. He demonstrated with dramatic realism. I peeked through the gap. Couldn't see much, fog and all. But there was a lady in a dark cloak with red trim round the hood. She was bending over Mr. Carver on the floor. Thought at first she was helping him, but then she stood up quick and the big knife was sticking out of him. She looked straight at me, or I thought she did, and I ran like Billy O. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "This cloak with red trim, you are certain?" "Positive, sir. Mrs. Carver's got one just like it. Wore it to church last Sunday." Amelia Carver made a small sound, half gasp, half sob. "My cloak was stolen from the stand in the hall yesterday morning," she whispered. "I thought one of the charwomen had taken it for a prank." Poirot turned back to Tommy. "And then? I hid round the corner till I heard the shop door slam. When I crept back, the yard door was shut and bolted from inside. Didn't know what to do, didn't want to get mixed up in murder, so I left the pies on the step and scarpered. Only when I heard the screaming later, I told me mum and she marched me to the police station." Jap scribbled furiously. Poirot paced, hands clasped behind his back. "So," he murmured, "a woman wearing Madame Carver's distinctive cloak is seen bending over the dying man at approximately 8 o'clock. Yet Madame herself did not leave her sister's house in Bethnal Green until 7:45, confirmed by 2 neighbors and the omnibus conductor. She arrived here at 8:17, ergo someone borrowed the cloak to cast suspicion upon her." Victoria Hale, wrists temporarily free, gave a bitter laugh. "Convenient. First I'm the murderer, now I'm innocent, and someone else wore a cloak to frame poor Amelia. Make up your mind, monsieur." Poirot ignored her. He addressed Tommy again. "The woman's face, did you see it?" Tommy shook his head. "Hood was up, scarf over the bottom half. But she was tallish and she ran light on her feet, not like Mrs. Carver, beggin' pardon, ma'am. Mrs. C's got a bit of a limp since she twisted her ankle last Michaelmas." Amelia inclined her head in acknowledgement. Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Who else in this house is tall, light-footed, and familiar with Madame's wardrobe?" Every gaze drifted as if pulled by a single string toward the doorway. There stood Elias Thorne's housekeeper, Mrs. Dugan, a thin, sharp-featured woman of 45 who had let herself in quietly with the latchkey Thorne had given her years ago. She wore a dark cloak. When she realized all eyes were on her, she tried to back into the hall, but Jap was already there. "Mrs. Dugan," Poirot said pleasantly, "you have something to tell us, I think." She lifted the cloak. Beneath it, on the left sleeve, a dark stain had spread, blood, already dried to a stiff brown. I found it on the hook when I came to do the breakfast things yesterday," she stammered. "Thought it was Mrs. Carver's. Didn't notice the blood till tonight. I was going to soak it." "Yet you wore it tonight," Poirot finished. "Why?" Mrs. Duggan's mouth worked soundlessly. Then the words tumbled out. "Mr. Thorne telephoned me at 7, said he needed me urgent, something about papers. When I got here, the back door was open. Mr. Carver was on the floor dying. Mr. Thorne was kneeling beside him, covered in blood, crying like a baby. He begged me to help. Said it was an accident. They'd fought over money. The knife went in. He made me put on Mrs. Carver's cloak so if anyone saw, they'd think it was her. We dragged the body to the bench, staged it to look like suicide. He wrote the note himself. Good at copying hands, Mr. Thorne is. Then he sent me out the smokehouse way with orders to burn the cloak. But I couldn't bring myself. It's good wool." Thorne lunged with a roar of animal fury. Jap caught him before he reached the woman. The constables pinned his arms. "You stupid cow," Thorne snarled. "I paid you £50 to keep your mouth shut." £50 and a guilty conscience," Mrs. Duggan spat back. "I've children, Elias Thorne. I won't hang for you." The room erupted. Jonathan shouting, Amelia weeping silently into her handkerchief, Victoria staring as though a stage curtain had dropped to reveal an entirely different play. Poirot raised his voice just enough to cut through the chaos. "Silence, if you please. The picture becomes clearer. Monsieur Thorne, you quarreled with your partner over the embezzled money. In the struggle he was stabbed, accidentally perhaps, but the law does not distinguish. Rather than call for help, you chose to conceal the crime. You forged the suicide note, planted the revolver, and the threatening letter sent the false message to draw Jonathan away. Even discarded your own bloodied glove and button to confuse the trail. A clever scheme, almost." Thorne sagged between the constables. "He was going to ruin me," he muttered. 15 years we built that business, and he was going to throw me out like offal. I only pushed him. He fell on the knife." Poirot regarded him with cold pity. "You pushed him onto a knife that was already in your hand." "There is a difference." He turned to Jap. "Chief Inspector, you have your murderer. Elias Thorne, I arrest you for the willful murder of Reginald Carver and Mrs. Duggan as accessory after the fact." But even as the handcuffs clicked a second time, Poirot's brow remained furrowed. He looked once more at the blood-stained cloak, at Tommy Rourke's frightened face, at Amelia Carver's trembling hands. Something still did not fit. He bent swiftly and examined the inside hem of the cloak. Sewn into the lining was a tiny pocket, the sort a lady uses for a latchkey or railway ticket. From it he drew a crumpled scrap of paper. It was a pawn ticket dated yesterday for 1 diamond brooch. Amelia's hand flew to her throat. The brooch was no longer there. Poirot held the ticket up so all could see. "Curious," he said softly. "The widow pawns her anniversary diamonds the day before her husband is murdered. Why, madam?" Amelia Carver met his gaze steadily, and for the first time that night she smiled, a small, sad, defiant smile. "Because, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I had decided to leave him tomorrow, and I needed money he would not give me willingly." She reached into her pocket and produced the real brooch, flashing coldly in her palm. "This is paste. A very good copy. The real stones are already sold. By tomorrow night I would have been on the boat train to Paris with enough to start a new life." The room was utterly still. Poirot looked from the paste brooch to Thorne's defeated slump, to Mrs. Duggan's terror, to Victoria's stunned expression. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "How many crimes are committed in one house on one night? Greed, fear, desperation, pride, each wearing a different mask." He bowed slightly to Amelia. "Madam, you are guilty of deception, but not, I think, of murder. The law will decide the rest." Outside, the milk carts were making their rounds. A pale wash of dawn showed between the curtains. Poirot pulled on his gloves. "Come, Jap. The little gray cells are satisfied for the moment. But the heart," he tapped his chest, "the heart still asks questions the law cannot answer." As they stepped into the cold morning air, the butcher's sign creaked one last time in the wind, and the painted cleaver seemed, for an instant, to gleam with fresh blood. Chapter 8. Darkness and Deception. Dawn had barely begun to bleach the fog when Poirot and Jap stepped out of the front door of Carver's butchery. The street was still empty except for a lone milk float and the soft clop of the horse's hooves. Poirot paused on the threshold, breathing deeply as though the cold air might wash away the taste of too many lies. It is finished, mon ami, Jap said yawning. Thorne's confession, Mrs. Dugan's evidence, the cloak, the pawn ticket, neat as a butcher's parcel. We'll have him charged by breakfast. Poirot did not answer at once. He was staring across the street at the narrow alley opposite, where the mist still clung like wet wool to the brickwork. Neat, he repeated softly. Yeah, too neat, Jap groaned. Not again, Poirot. You've done this to me before. We've got the man with blood on his cuffs and a motive the size of St. Paul's. Yet Poirot was already moving, swift and silent, crossing the cobbles toward the alley. Jap followed, grumbling. Halfway down the passage where the gas lamp had gone out, Poirot knelt. On the damp ground lay a single object, a woman's left-handed kid glove, pale gray suede, the palm darkly stained. Beside it, half trampled into the mud, was a torn scrap of red silk lining, exactly the shade of the trim on Amelia Carver's stolen cloak. Poirot lifted the glove with his handkerchief. Observe, Jap, the blood is still tacky. This was dropped no more than 20 minutes ago. And the size, small, delicate. Mrs. Duggan's hands are broad from years of scrubbing. This belonged to someone else. A sound, half sob, half gasp, came from the shadows ahead. A figure stumbled toward them. Amelia Carver, cloakless now, hair wild, the paste brooch gone from her throat. Her face was paper white, eyes huge with terror. He's here, she whispered. He came back. Before Jap could ask whom she meant, a deeper shadow detached itself from the wall behind her. Elias Thorne, coatless, wild-eyed, the scar a white slash across his cheek, stepped into the faint lamplight. In his right hand glinted the long boning knife he must have taken from the shop display before the constables sealed it. "Keep back," he snarled. "I'm finished anyway. Might as well take the meddling Belgian with me." Jap reached for his whistle, but Thorne was faster. He lunged. Amelia screamed. Poirot, small and apparently defenseless, simply sidestepped with the neat economy of a dancer. Thorne's momentum carried him past. Jap's truncheon caught him behind the ear with a sound like a butcher chopping sweet. Thorne dropped without a sound. When the constables had dragged him away, still unconscious, Poirot turned to Amelia. "Madame, why did you follow us?" She was shaking so violently she could hardly speak. I couldn't stay in that house another minute, and then I saw him, Thorne, slip out the scullery window. He had the knife. I thought he meant to silence me forever." Poirot studied her carefully. "Yet you did not cry out for help until he was already upon you." Her eyes slid away. "I was paralyzed with fear." "Or calculating the moment," Poirot said gently. He held up the blood-stained glove. "This is yours, madame. The monogram inside the cuff, AC, is embroidered in the same silk as the cloak lining. You dropped it deliberately, did you not? So that we would find it and believe Thorne had come back to kill you, cementing his guilt." Amelia's breath hitched. "I don't know what you—" Poirot cut her off with a small, weary gesture. "Let us return inside. There is one last performance to be given." Back in the parlor, now lit by harsh electric bulbs the police had rigged, the remaining players waited. Jonathan white-faced, Victoria rubbing her freed wrists, Mrs. Dugan sobbing into her apron in the kitchen under guard. Poirot did not sit. He stood beneath the gaselier like a ringmaster. "Mesdames and messieurs, we have had confession upon confession tonight, each more convenient than the last. Thorne claims accident. Mrs. Dugan claims loyalty. Victoria claims innocence. Amelia claims terror. Yet the little gray cells refuse to be satisfied." He held up the suede glove. "This glove is the key. It is left-handed, yes, but the blood is on the outside of the palm, not the inside. A murderer withdrawing a knife would stain the inside. Someone who merely pressed a bloodied hand against the palm to fake evidence would stain the outside. Exactly as here, he turned to Amelia. You staged the alley encounter, madam. You followed us wearing your own cloak, dropped the glove, then waited for Thorne to appear, knowing his despair would drive him to flee. When he did, you screamed at the perfect moment, a brave attempt to close the case forever. Jonathan started forward. Mother, tell me this isn't... Amelia's composure shattered. She laughed, a thin, cracked sound. Very clever, Monsieur Poirot. But you still have only Thorne's word that the stabbing was accident. What if it was no accident at all? What if Thorne meant to kill Reginald from the first and I merely... helped? She reached into her pocket and drew out the real diamond brooch, glittering like a tiny constellation. Reginald discovered the paste copy 2 days ago. He threatened to have me arrested for fraud. Thorne knew if the business collapsed under scandal, his embezzlement would come out too. So we made a pact. He would remove the obstacle. I would provide the perfect scapegoats. First Victoria, then Jonathan, finally Thorne himself when necessary. Victoria gasped. Jonathan looked as though he had been struck. Poirot nodded slowly. The perfect partnership. Thorne supplied the knife hand. You supplied the theater. The forged note, the planted revolver, the cloak, the alley melodrama, all your touches. And the beauty of it. When Thorne confessed, you could play the terrified widow safe forever. He turned to Jap. But there is still one detail, madam, that betrays you. From his pocket he produced a small glass vial containing a few grains of white powder. Arsenic. Found hidden behind the flour bin in your kitchen. Enough to kill a horse. The post-mortem will show traces in Carver's stomach. He took it in his evening cocoa, prepared by your own loving hand. The knife thrust came later, after he was already dying in agony. Thorne's accident was merely the curtain call. Amelia stared at the vial as though it were alive. You poisoned him slowly over weeks, Poirot continued almost sorrowfully. When he began to suspect, you persuaded Thorne the only way to save himself was to finish the job quickly. A suicide staging would protect you both. But Thorne panicked and tried to run. You could not allow that. Silence, absolute and terrible, filled the room. Amelia looked suddenly very small inside her black dress. I endured 28 years of his fists, she said at last, voice steady now. Every bruise hidden under long sleeves, every broken rib explained as a fall. When he found the paste brooch, he laughed, said he would see me in the workhouse. I decided he would not laugh again. She held out her wrists for the handcuffs herself. Jonathan turned away, retching. Victoria began to cry without sound. Mrs. Dugan crossed herself and muttered a prayer. Poirot watched Amelia being led out, then spoke quietly to Jap. 2 murderers, mon ami. One who struck in rage, one who planned in ice. The blade was Thorne's despair, the poison was hers. Jap shook his head. And the devil, was it suicide, murder, or both? Poirot gazed at the dark stain on the workbench, visible through the open door. It was marriage, he said simply, in its final perfect cut. Outside, the sun rose over Whitechapel, thin, cold, and mercilessly clear. Chapter 9. The Final Weighing. The shop was quiet now, unnaturally quiet. The blood had been covered with sawdust and a tarpaulin. The marble slabs looked almost clean again. Only the faint metallic smell remained and the cold that comes after violence. Hercule Poirot stood alone beneath the hanging sausages, hands clasped behind his back, eyes half closed. Jap had taken Amelia and Thorne away in separate vans. Jonathan had been driven home by a sympathetic constable. Victoria Hale sat in the kitchen with Mrs. Dugan, both women drinking strong tea under the watchful eye of a police matron. The house was emptied of suspects, yet Poirot had not left. He was waiting for the last piece. At 20 minutes past 7, the street door opened without a knock. A man entered, tall, well-dressed in a dark Chesterfield coat carrying a black medical bag. His face was thin, ascetic, the face of a priest who has seen too many deathbeds. Dr. Giles Harrington, toxicologist to the Home Office, summoned by Poirot's urgent telephone call at dawn. "You have the results?" Poirot asked. Harrington set the bag on the counter, opened it, and drew out a folder. "I worked through the night, stomach contents, blood, hair samples, definitive." He laid 3 typed sheets side by side. Reginald Carver died of massive arsenic poisoning. The knife wound was post-mortem, delivered no more than 5 minutes after cardiac arrest. There was enough arsenic in his liver to kill 3 men. Chronic administration over at least 6 weeks with a fatal dose in the last night's cocoa. Poirot nodded slowly. "As I thought." "And the cocoa tin?" "Contaminated. The tin in the kitchen cupboard, labeled Bourneville, contained 38 grains of white arsenic mixed with the cocoa powder." Childishly simple, yet deadly. Poirot took the report, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. "Merci, docteur. You have done the dead man a final service." Harrington hesitated. "There is one more thing, Monsieur Poirot. The arsenic was not pure. It contained traces of antimony and a vegetable alkaloid, belladonna, a very particular mixture sold only by one supplier in England, J. H. Barker and Sons, manufacturing chemists, Limehouse. They keep meticulous records. Their last sale of that exact compound was 6 weeks ago, to Mrs. Amelia Carver for rat extermination in the cellar." Poirot's eyes closed entirely for a moment. "Of course. The perfect English poison. Quiet, respectable, domestic." He thanked the doctor again and showed him out. Then he returned to the parlor and rang the bell for the matron. "Ask Miss Hale to come to me, s'il vous plaît." Victoria entered a minute later, eyes swollen, auburn hair pinned severely back. She had regained some of her old defiance. "You were right," she said without preamble. "I did not kill him, but I knew about the poison. Amelia told me everything the day she bought it. She was going to leave him, she said, but only if he was dead first. She offered me £200 to keep silent and to help create confusion if necessary. I refused the money, but I kept silent. God help me." Poirot regarded her steadily. "Silence is sometimes the heaviest crime of all, mademoiselle." She nodded, tears starting again. "Will I be charged?" "That is for the Director of Public Prosecutions, but your testimony will weigh heavily in your favor." When she had gone, Poirot climbed the stairs to the private apartments one last time. In Amelia's bedroom, he opened the wardrobe. Hanging at the back was a second cloak, identical to the first, even to the red silk trim. He examined the hem. No hidden pocket, no pawn ticket. Then he knelt and slid his hand beneath the chest of drawers. His fingers closed on a small tin box. Inside lay the real diamond brooch wrapped in black silk and a single sheet of heavy cream notepaper. Amelia's handwriting, undated. "If you are reading this, I am either free or dead. Either way, I am finished with pretending. Reginald beat the tenderness out of me years ago. What remained was calculation. I poisoned him slowly so that when the knife went in, no one would look for poison. Thorne believed he killed him. Let him believe it. He deserved the noose more than I." Poirot folded the letter and placed it in his pocket beside the toxicology report. Downstairs again, he found Jap returned, looking 10 years older. "Thorne's still unconscious," Jap said. "May not wake up. Amelia's asking for you." They went to the Black Maria parked at the curb. Amelia sat inside, wrists cuffed, flanked by 2 wardresses. She looked strangely serene. "You found the letter," she said. It was not a question. "I did." "And the brooch?" "That also." She smiled faintly. Then you know everything. Not quite everything, madame. One last curiosity. Why did you pawn the real stones and keep the paste copy on your dress? Because I wanted him to discover the substitution. I wanted the final quarrel. I wanted him to strike me one last time so that when he died I could say, "See what he drove me to." Even in death I needed the world to take my side. Poirot studied her for a long moment. "You planned a perfect crime," he said at last, "and nearly succeeded. But perfection is impossible when the heart is divided. You hated him too much to let Thorne take all the blame. In the end, you could not bear that another should hang for your murder." Amelia looked out at the brightening street where the first costermongers were setting up their barrows. "I suppose," she said quietly, "that is the only honest thing I have done in years." The van door closed. The horses moved off, iron wheels ringing on the cobbles. Jap cleared his throat. "Case closed, then. Poison by the wife, knife by the partner, both guilty, different degrees. Thorne may cheat the rope if he dies, but she'll swing for certain." Poirot watched the van disappear around the corner toward Commercial Street. "No, mon ami," he said softly. "The rope is too quick. Amelia Carver will live a very long time. She has arranged it so. A woman who can wait 6 weeks for poison to work can wait years for a pardon that will never come. Every morning she will wake in Holloway and remember the taste of cocoa. That is her true punishment." Jap shivered, though the sun was rising warm. "You always did have a nasty turn of mind, Poirot." Poirot adjusted his hat and began walking toward the main road in search of a taxi. "Not nasty, Jap. Merely precise, like a butcher's blade." Behind them, the shop sign still swung gently in the morning breeze. Carver and Son Nestor. 1887. The painted cleaver caught the sunlight and flashed once like a warning, before the sun climbed higher and the illusion of blood vanished. Poirot did not look back. Chapter 10. The Grey Cell's Triumph. 3 weeks later, on a bright November morning, sharp enough to cut paper, Hercule Poirot sat in his immaculate flat at Whitehaven Mansions, finishing a late breakfast of brioche and chocolate. The newspapers lay folded beside his plate. Everyone carried the same headline: "Whitechapel Butcher Murder. Widow sentenced to death, partner dies in hospital without regaining consciousness." Poirot sipped his chocolate, expression unreadable. The bell rang. George, his valet, admitted Chief Inspector Jap, hat in hand, looking sheepish. "Thought you'd like to know it's all tidied up," Jap began. "Amelia Carver never appealed. Said she was tired. Thorne went last night, brain hemorrhage. Mrs. Dugan got 5 years as accessory. Jonathan sold the shop, emigrating to Canada. Victoria Hales left London, nobody knows where." Poirot nodded. "And the brooch?" "Real diamonds auctioned for the creditors, paste copies in the Black Museum now, labeled Instrument of Murder. Funny old world." He hesitated. "Look here, Poirot. Still don't understand how you knew it was her from the start. You let Thorne confess, let Victoria confess, let the housekeeper spin her tale. Why?" Poirot set down his cup with delicate precision. "Because, mon cher Jap, the truth was never in one confession. It was scattered among them all like meat on a butcher's block. I needed every cut to see the whole carcass." He rose and crossed to the window. Below, the plane trees along the embankment were almost bare. The Thames glinted like polished steel. Only a wife thinks in such layers. A lover strikes once. A partner panics. A son rages. But a wife who has endured 28 years of violence, she seasons the dish slowly, then serves it with a smile. Jap grimaced. "Cold-blooded." "No," Poirot corrected gently. "Ice-blooded. There is a difference." He returned to the table and picked up a small object wrapped in tissue. The real diamond brooch, returned to him anonymously the day after the trial. Reginald Carver bought this for their silver anniversary. Amelia told me he clasped it round her neck himself and said, "Now you're chained to me in diamonds as well as gold." She wore the paste copy to the end, so that when the hangman placed the noose, the last thing those stones touched would be a lie. Japp shuddered. "You're giving me the creeps." Poirot smiled, the famous feline smile. "Good. Horror is the tribute vice pays to virtue." He opened a drawer and took out a single sheet of heavy cream notepaper, the letter he had found beneath Amelia's chest of drawers. He laid it on the table between them. "Read the last line again," Japp read aloud. "Tell Monsieur Poirot he was the only man who ever saw me clearly. For that I thank him." Japp looked up, puzzled. "She wanted you to find it?" "She wanted someone to know the whole truth, even if the court and newspapers never heard it. A murderer's vanity is sometimes greater than her fear." Poirot folded the letter and placed it, together with the brooch, into a small morocco case. "I shall keep these," he said. "Not as trophies, never that, but as reminders. Reminders that behind every perfect crime stands a perfect heart, broken in a slightly different place." Japp cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, case closed anyway. Fancy a spot of lunch? My treat." Poirot considered, then shook his head. "Another time, perhaps. Today I have an appointment." "With whom?" "With myself." He walked Japp to the door, then returned to the sitting room. From the mantelpiece he took a photograph none of his visitors ever noticed. A much younger Poirot in Belgian uniform standing beside a dark-haired woman in nurse's veil. Her eyes were steady, amused, unafraid. Poirot raised his cup in a small private toast. "Tous les femmes formidables," he murmured. "May they poison only those who deserve it." He drank the last of the chocolate, set the cup down with finality, and reached for his hat and cane. Outside, London bustled on, oblivious. Delivery vans replaced delivery vans. Children bowled hoops. A butcher's boy cycled past whistling, his tray empty now of mutton pies. Life, having weighed the meat, had moved on to the next customer. And in Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot, small, compact, impeccable, walked out into the pale sunlight, mustaches bristling with satisfaction. Gray cells quietly, perfectly at rest. The cleaver had fallen, the balance was restored, and somewhere in Holloway Prison a woman in black sat in her cell and waited for a morning that would never quite arrive, listening to the measured ticking of a clock that marked not hours but heartbeats she had stolen from a man who once believed he owned her. Order and method had prevailed.